Welcome to a realm where personal growth meets expansive spirituality and where we're not just scratching the surface, we're diving deep, widening our perspectives, and having a darn good time doing it. This is the Enlightened Podcast, and I am your host, Jen Hamilton. You'll enjoy an infusion of motivation, empowerment, and inspiration that will resonate in every aspect of your life. Expect captivating stories, heartfelt musings, and my own personal experiences. But that's not all. I'm bringing awe-inspiring individuals to the table, so get ready to meet some remarkable souls whose wisdom and stories will leave you spellbound. No topic is off limits here. Brace yourself for raw authenticity, unfiltered vulnerability, and yes, the occasional splash of explicit language. We're delving into the realms of the esoteric, mystical, and the woo-woo, unafraid to explore the extraordinary. So if you are ready to venture beyond the surface, to explore the depths of your soul, and to awaken the magic of life, if your heart says yes, then hit that play button and let the Enlightened Podcast guide you on this remarkable expedition. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Enlightened Podcast. I am your host, Jan, and today's very special guest is Simon Rinne, who is a social worker, therapist, and lived experience mental health advocate. Simon's passion for men's mental health comes from his own struggle of living with mental illness for over 30 years. Simon shares his story to inspire men to recognize that it's possible to live through mental illness and still thrive in all aspects of your life. Outside of advocating for better men's mental health, Simon is a husband and father of two, the founder of Mindful Men, a therapy practice dedicated to supporting men to switch off autopilot and switching on conscious living. It was so special to have Simon on the podcast sharing his personal story and the magic that he creates in this world to support other men. So whether you're a man listening to this, there is so much epic advice here for you and so many gold nuggets of wisdom. Or if you're a female wanting to pass this on to the significant other male in your life, please feel free to do so. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hello, Simon. Welcome to the Enlightened Podcast. How are you today?
I'm going really well, Jen. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to have a chat with you today.
Absolutely. And you're a fellow Queenslander. You're at the Sunshine Coast, so we're experiencing the same weather.
It is beautiful weather. I've got the pool clean now, so I'm ready for summer, early summer, and the kids are loving it, and my wife's loving it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the weekend.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, Simon, you're a social worker and therapist for men, something we need in this world. Tell us all about the magic that you do.
Wow, it's I like to think of it as magic, actually, now that you've thought about it. But yeah, I work specifically with men in the mental health and the disability space. A little bit of return to work stuff with work cover as well, and I work specifically with men just because of my own lived experience of mental illness. And so I wanted to design a therapy business that was for men, that was destigmatizing in the way that we approach mental illness and disability particularly, and just something where guys can feel connected and part of a bigger community that's outside of their own heads, which is where I've been in most of my life. So that's part of the magic that I do. And yeah, let's have a chat about that today.
Yeah, I'd love to dive into your journey if you're open to sharing in, whatever capacity that looks like for you. Tell us about your experience, with your version of mental health and well-being.
Yeah, so it's quite a long story. So I'm 40 this year, so I just turned 40 in August. But when I was 8 years old to 28, I lived with undiagnosed obsessive-compulsive disorder, depression, and anxiety as well. And then later in my life, I've also experienced workplace burnout, which wasn't just the workplace. It was a whole bunch of things happening around 2020. If everyone remembers COVID, hopefully you do. That's roughly when it happened. But it wasn't just specific to COVID as well. So lots of different mental health challenges for me. And for a long time, in fact, the majority of that time, it was a survival mentality that I had. It was started when I was 8 in the schoolyard, and some student come up to me and said, Simon, if you stop using your voice for more than a minute, you're going to lose your voice forever. And yeah, most people could just let go, you know what, that's just rubbish. But something inside of me clicked, and I thought that was the gospel. I thought that was definitely going to happen. What I've since come to learn is this was the start of my obsessive compulsive disorder. And so, for anyone who's not sure what that is, and you see a lot in social media of people saying, I'm a little bit OCD or whatever, most of the times they're not. And there's a misconception about what OCD is because people think it's just, I like things neat and tidy, or I like to wash my hands and stuff like that. Not really, unless you've got certain types of OCD. And so for me, I developed this obsessive thought. So this is the O in OCD, that, oh no, I'm going to lose my voice if I don't use it every minute. And so the only way to alleviate the distress that came with that, and that distress is an anxiety response, is to perform a compulsive act or a compulsion or a behavior. And for me, that was humming. And so every minute, on the minute, I'd probably go like this, just checking that my voice was still there.
Wow.
I did this for about 2 years, and I did it so quietly that nobody ever picked it up and said, Simon, why are you making that noise? And at the time, I didn't know what this was OCD. I didn't know what mental health was. In fact, I grew up in the 80s and 90s and the noughties. That was my youth, and nobody talked about mental health at all. And so I did this in silence. I suffered in silence, and this progressed, though. After the 2 years, it progressed into more different types of checking behavior. A lot of it was around checking my bag, make sure I've got all my school stuff ready because I didn't want to get in trouble from the teachers. And that fear of getting in trouble was overwhelming to the point where I'll be constantly opening up the bag, checking I've got my stuff, closing the bag, opening it up again, checking it. And because I felt like every time I opened it as well, something would fall out and then I'd lose it or whatever. And so that kind of evolved. But then it really took off in my teens, and around 13 or so, roughly. My mum and dad separated, and so me and my little brother, we moved out with mum. And all of a sudden, I became the man of the house, because back then there was this whole notion around what it means to be a boy and a man, and there was a man of the house. And so I was the oldest boy. That was me. And so every night, without fail, I would walk around the house and check windows, doors, gates outside were locked, with this because of this overwhelming fear that someone was going to break into the house, steal our stuff, hurt us, kidnap us, some pretty full-on things. And then to add to that, I would also check things like the iron was off, the stove was off, the fridge door was closed properly, because I feared that the house was also going to burn down with us sleeping inside. And this was so overwhelming. And this process, I mean, most people do this for 5 minutes before they go to bed, they check everything. For me, this was a 3 to 4 hour ordeal on some nights.
Wow.
Other nights, it might have been about an hour. And this is at a 13, 14-year-old. And I did it all in the dark. So there was no iPhones back then to have the light on it. So it was just me creeping around in the dark in my house because I didn't want to wake up my brother or my mum. And I had to do it. I could not do it. And it got so bad to a point where, and this is probably one of my darkest moments, it was the first time I experienced suicidal ideation, was this absolute exhaustion from doing this every single night, that I put my head in the pillow and just said, I don't want to wake up tomorrow. But something inside me ticked, and I don't know where this came from, and I've got it today somewhere on my messy desk here, and hence messy. I said messy, not neat and freak, because I do have OCD. But I said to myself, Simon, no matter how dark today is, the sun will always rise tomorrow. And I don't know where this came from, never heard this before, but it kind of became my personal mantra that I can get through each night, because tomorrow is the new day, a new possibility. There's warmth in the sun, there's growth in the sun. Let's just get through tonight. And I would tell myself that every night, because every night I'll get so exhausted by this process that I just wanted it all to end. And I didn't have a way of talking about it or dealing with it. And then I hit my teens, and playing end of footy season, and we went to a away camp for a bit of a trip, and this is where I was introduced to alcohol. And at first I thought alcohol was fantastic because it allows me just to relax and have a bit of fun. But what I've since come to learn as a 40-year-old is my use of alcohol was very much a big band-aid on myself to slow my mind down, to feel calm, to feel kind of normal, if that makes sense, whatever normal is. and just to be okay in that moment. And so that became a bit of an unconscious coping mechanism that have used for the majority of my life, just to feel
Mm.
that normality about life. And so the OCD checking and all this type of stuff, it all centered around safety and security, wanting to feel safe, wanting to feel secure, wanting to assure other people in the household were safe and secure as well. Extended to my car as well, so making sure the car's fully locked. There'll be some days where I would drive off to school or to work, and be gone for about half an hour. Then something in my brain would say, "You've got to go check that front door in the house." Because while you're away, if someone gets in, they're going to do all those things, steal your stuff, wreck the house, or maybe they'll be waiting for you when you return. So I would
Mm.
drive half an hour back, check it all, and off I go again. And I had to do it so many times, and this is very unique to OCD, is we do things in repetition because things have to be just right. So you have to check 5 times because the magic number 5, for whatever reason, and this is me, not necessarily anybody else, just felt right after 5 checks or 10 checks or 3 checks. Mine were 3, 5s, 10s. Those are my numbers. Other people do it to 100 or whatever. It's just finding that thing, that moment where everything feels just right. And then you go, okay, I don't need to check this anymore. I can go off and do other things. And it wasn't until, I still did all that type of stuff and got into the public service. So I had a white collar job for 15 years after uni, and it changed there in a funny way or a different way as well, where, just to send an email, I would have to check and check and check so many times because I had this obsessive thought that once I press send, all the words were going to change. There'll be all these profanities in it, or it would go to the wrong people. And then someone will look at me and go, "What the hell have you done, Simon?" And pull me into the manager's office, and I'd be absolutely blasted at. Never happened. I don't think email has the capacity to do that. But I had this obsessive thought that it would. And so I'd check it both when I'm writing it and then when I'm putting in the twos and the CCs and all that type of stuff. But then after I sent it, I would then recheck it again. And I might check that again and again throughout the day just to make sure, okay, is that email okay? And I'd do this very quickly to the point where often I'd be the first person to respond to emails or to, give somebody else some assistance or whatever. So it's all very masked very well. I was almost a perfectionist. And in fact, people who live with OCD have a high level of perfectionism because that's that just right feeling. Things have to be perfect to feel just right and feel okay. And that alleviates that anxiety. And so it then turned and it connected with the alcohol stuff. And this is not something I've really not acknowledged or known about until I've got a bit older and done some work, is go to the Friday night drinks after a big week, and to let my hair down would have a few drinks. And I would drink fast, as a lot of Aussie guys know about. We drink fast. We don't just go for one, and one means really like 2 or 3. We do it in multiples. And I don't think I got to a point where I made so much of a fool of myself on these nights where I've completely let my hair down. I felt normal, but I'd get on the dance floor, I'd show off a little bit and make a bit of a larrikin of myself. But it was never to the extreme where I thought where something bad was going to happen to me at work the next day or the next week. But what would happen is after that Friday night drinks, my mind would go into overdrive. And what it would do, it would constantly replay the night in my head and form rumination, this concept around rumination. So that's that cyclical thought or thinking process. And the reason I would do that is because I'd be trying to pick apart the night, trying to find those moments of vulnerability where someone's going to say, "All right, Simon, now you're going to be pulled into the manager's office on Monday." And I would do this obsessively to the point where I would think about the night so much that it would become distorted and I would forget what was actually happened on the night with what my brain was telling me happened on the night. And the only way to alleviate that was to go back to work on Monday and kind of test or check in with the people that I thought maybe in my mind I've said something to or done something. And if they responded positively back to me, I'm like, whew, things are okay. Like nothing happened like usual. Like in 99% of the time, nothing happened. But if that person wasn't there maybe on Monday, it would add a day to the distress and so forth. And then it just became unbearable, and to the point where around 27 years of age, my now wife had started to encourage me, say, Simon, you're not quite the person who I connected with when we started dating. I think you need to see someone. And for about a year or so, I would always deflect, like a lot of Aussie guys do, is say, it's not me, it's you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop drinking for a weekend and hopefully, feel better, eat clean this week, and I'll go for a few more runs around the block. I'm going to suck it up like a man does. That didn't serve me at all. In fact, I just went back to old habits. These obsessive things kept happening. The Friday night drinks thing still happened, to the point where I had to actually remove myself from those events because I worried so much about getting stuck in these thinking loops. And so at 28, my wife gave me an ultimatum and said, you either get out or go get help. And I thought, this was my light bulb moment. You know what? She's right. I've done this for 20 years, trying to outthink it, trying to deal with it myself. I'm recognizing now that I need some help. And so I made one of the most difficult calls was to call my GP and book in, but then actually go there and say, I think I have a mental health issue. I didn't know what it was growing up, but I knew what it was at 28. And this was 11 years ago, I think, 2012, that I did this. And that started a process of learning about, what OCD is and discovering, I've been living with it for so long, but also depression, also anxiety, and starting to name it so that then we can then tame it. But at first I didn't do the work. I walked into a psychologist and I expected them to wave a magic wand and heal me, and then I'd be out and that'll be it. And wouldn't have to be on meds. I wouldn't have to give up drinking. I wouldn't have to do all that stuff. And what I've come to learn over the last 11 years is you have to do the homework. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in this survival mode. And for a long time, up until very recently, I have been in that survival mode. This is just me. I've got OCD. I've got anxiety. I've got depression. I'm a guy. I'm burnt out in 2020. But more recently, I've started to move that discourse, and I think that some of the social worker in me is coming out now. I studied that as a mature age student, so I was a bit more focused on learning the theories and stuff around that. But then, as part of the designing of Mindful Men, the business, it's moving that survival mode into thrival mode, and using that pain that I've had bottled up for so long as fuel for the purpose that I do, and that's serving men in the therapy clinic, but also in the advocacy work I do, my own podcast, any speeches I do, any training I do, is keeping those guys in mind that haven't got the voice yet, and hopefully inspiring them to hear my story or hear the story of other people that I talk to and put their hands up and say, I think I need to go and get some help.
Wow, what a journey you've been on. I want to circle back to something that you mentioned quite early on in your experience about the humming. And you mentioned doing it every hour on the hour for even just momentarily. Simon, did you have conscious awareness of that? Were you checking the clock? Was it just something that came naturally every hour, or did you consciously decide every hour on the hour that you had to hum?
It was actually every minute.
Every minute. Oh,
Yeah.
right. Sorry,
I might have misquoted myself. But every minute. So every minute, not it wasn't conscious that, it was dead on, the 0 seconds, but it was just like, okay, I haven't done it for roughly a minute. I've got to hum. I've got to do something. And interestingly, like I reflect back on that moment, and when I was doing things like playing footy or doing athletics, and when I was busy, my mind was busy, I probably wasn't doing it. I was focused on the other tasks that I was doing. But if I was sitting in class or in the schoolyard or at home and I wasn't overly busy, then I would be consciously going, okay, I haven't checked. I haven't checked. And it's the same with all the other checking behaviors as well. It's like, okay, I haven't checked for a bit. Do I need to go and do that? And certain things happen at certain parts of the day. But for a lot of that, like the school bag stuff was happening all day at school. All day. Even though I should have been focusing on learning, I was actually focused more about where is my bag.
Got you. And was it ever picked up? Did a teacher or your mum or anyone say, hey, what are you doing? Or this is quite repetitive behavior?
No, never. And so I
Nothing.
wore that mask really well. And interestingly, as I've become to learn about OCD, is that OCD is what they call a silent condition. And on average, it takes someone from first symptom to first treatment for OCD about 13 to 15 years.
Wow.
Mine was double that, because
Mhm.
even though I was diagnosed with OCD back in 2012, since then there's only been one therapist who actually wanted to treat the OCD. Everyone else has been around depression and a little bit
Mm.
about anxiety. And aside from that, burnout. When I burnt out, I went and specifically got support for burnout. But it's never been targeted. And I actually had to find an OCD therapist and say, I want to start working on this stuff, because it's the underlying thing that fuels all the other things.
Mm. Wow, interesting. What are you noticing with men that you're working with? Like, what are some of the common themes that you're seeing in men at the moment?
Yeah, so one of the most common phone calls I have every week is from a partner or a daughter or someone in a family unit or support network saying, "I've got a guy in my life. How do I get him into therapy? He
Mhm.
needs something." And often it's that deflecting thing, the thing that I did for a long time. It's maybe not recognizing that there is an issue to start with,
Mhm.
and just doing that old suck it up mentality that we've all grown up with. I grew up in the 80s, 90s, noughties, and it was defined by that period. To be a man was to be tough and stoic and all that type of stuff. So that's part of the issue, is not having that awareness that some support's needed. But then also the stigma associated with going and get mental health treatment is still huge. And I think it's improved since COVID, because COVID really forced a lot of us in society, men and women, to go, you know what, I'm not doing okay. I need to start talking. And prior to that, mental health discussions were far less. So I'm actually thankful for COVID for bringing it out into the spotlight.
Mm.
As much as you can be thankful for COVID and working from home, because that was also cool. um, but so that they're the two biggest issues. And then once they're in there, it's not having that awareness of what to talk about. So often the guys that are come in, they're like, I've never done this before. I don't know what this is going to be. I don't know what to do, what to say. Am I allowed to say this? And so for me, my role is then to just guide them and say, well, look, this is what it could look like. It's really up to you. If you like, and this is where I value my lived experience as a therapist, I say, I've been where you are, and I've built this business based on what I don't like in therapy. So do you want me to share some of the good things that can come out of therapy? And
Mm.
it's my service is a bit unique because I don't really do it in a clinic either. So my sessions are beach walks. So we do therapy walking side by side, or we get in the car and go for a drive, or we go get a coffee, or for the younger guys, it's video games. I love video games, or it's shooting hoops, kicking a footy. It is so different to what people think mental health treatment is. You don't have to be sitting in four walls talking face to face with someone who's got a clipboard and a note and pad.
Mhm.
Like, it can be
Mhm.
very relaxed, and that's the beauty about what I do. And from that lived experience, I prefer that also as a clinician as well, being out in nature and using our five senses to just be there in the moment.
Yes. And can I just take a moment to just acknowledge you for doing this work and doing it in the way that you do it as well? Because when I mean, I'm trained in clinical hypnotherapy, psychotherapy, and coaching. And coaching is generally how I sort of package everything together. And there was never ever a part of me that wanted to step into a clinical environment, nor study psychology, because the box was way too small for me as well. And so, what we can do outside of the full four walls of, being a clinician or being in that clinical space, I believe is so much more powerful. And yes, there is a space for the four walls 100%. Some people are really drawn to being in the four walls, and that's fine. And for all the other people, the idea of going to, sit in a park or go for a walk on a beach, like, let's just normalize this all. And I'm telling you now, as, a woman, in her 30s, not just as a coach, but as a woman who does the work on herself, there is nothing sexier than a man out there that is working on himself or says, I'm off to see my therapist. I'm like, oh my God, like, you get it. Because, the idea of doing work on yourself these days is sexy. That is what, women want. Like, that's what we're drawn to in men, because there has been so much stigma around therapy for men, or, men that are so shut down and so closed off to their emotions or their mental well-being, And the women have been doing the work for quite some time. And it's like, come on, men, catch up. Like, we need you here with us, you know? And so when we hear of men doing the work, it's like, oh, he's a keeper. It's actually doing the opposite of that old school mentality of men need to just show up and be stoic, like you said, and, not do the work and hold all the emotions in, because I feel like that iteration of the masculine is quite limited. I really want to speak into when you were going through this experience, like when you were 8 and this experience happened in the playground, and growing up with these compulsions and this behavior, not first of all not having it picked up, but then not even, I guess, knowing what that was in yourself. What did you need as a child? What did little Simon need through that?
It's a great question. And it's essentially, I designed the business based on being the bloke or that go-to person that I never had, who can
Mm.
go, I can go and say, something's not quite right here. Can we have a chat? Yeah, I lived with mum and dad, but they came from a generation where they didn't talk about mental health. And so going to them and talking, particularly my dad, he would just say, suck it up. Don't be a pussy. Don't be a girl. Don't be a sissy. And it's just reinforced in the schoolyard as well from my mates. If you saw someone crying, that those words would come out. That was the mantra back then. I dare say it probably is still to today, a lot less than it used to be. And so it's really around being that younger version of me needed someone to talk to. And now I really pride myself on being that guy that guys can come and talk to in my therapy practice.
Mm. What do you think could have potentially changed the trajectory of your life had you had that really strong male influence in your life, that instead of calling you a sissy or a pussy, what would they have had to have said to you for you to be like, oh, actually, I'm okay?
I really don't know. I think what they could have said, and I laugh at this, and I use humor a lot in my own mental health journey because I think laughing is great for the body and the soul and the mind as well. But if they had said to me, Simon, did you know there's a monk that sits up in a cave on top of a mountain who has taken a vow of silence for the last 10 years, but still has a capacity to talk, then maybe I would never have developed OCD. It's because I didn't
Mm.
realize that those kind of people existed. I just took what this kid said in the schoolyard as absolute gospel and I ran with it. And I don't know why, because leading into that, I wasn't an anxious kid. Like I was actually, mum used to say I was quite a happy-go-lucky kid. Nothing would faze me. I'd be laughing, smiling, and all this type of stuff. In fact, on the outside, I continued to do that. But on the inside, I was much of a very different person. And to the point where as I got older, that happy-go-lucky kid just ultimately disappeared. And what I was projecting to the world was this facade of I'm okay, I'm happy, I'm a joker, I'm a larrikin, all this type of stuff. And then as I've become an adult, that's turned into some pretty significant loneliness because I've become much more introverted as I've got older. And now my social circle is very small because there's so much mental capacity that I go through just to sustain or even create new relationships as well. And so if I had that person early on who could give me some guidance or just be someone who I felt safe enough to say, this is what I'm going through, maybe all of this stuff wouldn't happen. But then at the same time, maybe it would have happened. Maybe I was predisposed to an anxiety condition or depression and so forth, and recognize that that's okay as well. Like it's not something to be ashamed of. In fact, I now wear these labels as a bit of pride because I can say this is me. This is the whole of me. And for so much of my life, I wasn't able to do that up until very recently.
That's amazing. I'm so curious. Do you hold resentment towards that kid in the playground?
I couldn't even tell you who it was these days, but not really. No, I think it was more. I think it was. If I think about resentment, it's probably more to myself. I wished I knew better, but
Mm.
at the same time, I was 8. Like
Yeah.
there's so many things that go through a kid's mind as well, and I often think that like I wished I just didn't do that, but I did, and it's gone, and I've just, unlike most people who could just let it go, I just couldn't let it go. And it's just
Yeah.
formed into what it is today. But it is much better today. Like it's nowhere near as bad as it was. in my, at 8 to my teens to my 20s, even in my early 30s. As a now 40-year-old, it is much more manageable. But that's also because I've gone and got treatment that's specific to OCD.
Yeah, and you've got that awareness of what's going on as well, and you've got the tools there to support you. For any listeners out there that are parents, what are some of the signs that they should be looking for their children that perhaps are presenting not necessarily with OCD, but anything that needs some support around their mental well-being? What are some of the things that as parents we should be looking out for in our kids?
Yeah, this is a tough one because I'm a dad of two. I've got a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and often I'm not doing well, and so I put a lot of shame on myself about not being the best dad in the world, and all this type of stuff. And I'm not a child specific therapist either, but some general things I guess from my own experience would be looking out for repetitive behaviors. I mean, that's a huge one. That's not just in the OCD space, but things like autism and ADHD as well. What's the things that are happening in the household that are a little bit repetitive, and it's exploring that. It's the child that was happy go lucky and maybe has become reserved, or doesn't really want to share what's going on at school, or maybe maybe a lot of lying and changing their stories around, trying not to get caught out for something or whatever. Um, it does vary from child to child, and it's really hard to pick up. But I think there's some basic ones here. The repetition, particularly, and that's unique to my story, is that repetitive behavior, like the bag checking. That was a very overt one. People could have seen me doing that, but no one ever said anything. Whereas the humming, it must have been so quiet that nobody heard it. Even kids sitting next to me at the next table, in the classroom. So just looking out for those types of things. But it's certainly the reserved children that aren't being their usual self as well. But then as a parent of someone as a parent who has mental health challenges, it's recognizing that we don't have to be perfect parents. It's that we can be good enough parents, and we can have bad days and still pick ourselves up, and our kids will still love us as well. It's about showing that vulnerability as a dad, for example, and saying, you know what, I am not doing well today, and letting the kids kind of understand that without going overboard. We don't want to burden them with our issues, but just saying, yeah, maybe, mate, I'm feeling a bit sad today and I'm just having a tear about that. Showing them that, because that encourages them to then say it's okay for them, to have a cry and come to you as well. That's been something that I've really cherished with my kids, is I won't shy away from having a tear in front of them, and they'll come up and give me the biggest cuddle and kiss, that's probably also what I needed as a little kid as well, as opposed to wiping away the tear and trying to hide it and go and seclude myself until the emotions, passed as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. What would you say to let's talk about the partners, so the wives, the girlfriends, the mothers, the sisters that perhaps come to you and say, my, significant male in my life needs support but doesn't want to. Where do you sit with that? Because for me, I've always been through my training, it's always got to be they have to come to me because they're the ones that have to make that step first. And I know how hard it is, especially for men, to make that first step. Where are you with that? Obviously, you work directly with just men. Do you get the call from the significant female to say, my significant male needs your support? How does that work?
Yeah, pretty much like that.
Yeah.
It's actually rare that a male will call me. I mean, I
Yeah.
get a few, which is really awesome, but mostly it's a significant other. In the disability space, it might be their disability support workers or whatever. And so that's one of the questions that come up every week, without doubt, is I've got someone who I think you would be good to talk to. How do I do it? I said, well, you can't force them to come into therapy and talk to me, but what you can do is plant seeds. It's maybe I've got the Mindful Men podcast. Maybe play that in the background. Subliminal messaging. And they can hear me talk. Oh, what's this dude talking about? Depression or burnout or talking about OCD or whatever it is. And I've talked about a range of different subjects on the Mindful Men podcast. And I use that as a tool. I say, put it on my social media. I'm all over social media. Just put it on and say, oh, or maybe you should follow this dude or whatever. For other guys, it's knowing how to even engage the system as well. So, I do private work, I do NDIS work, so disability work. But other people, they're like, what about these mental health care plans? And so I can talk them through that and say, well, this is how you do it. You go to a GP and you say, I think I've got a mental health challenge. You do a survey, and if you meet the criteria, you get a mental health care plan. And if money's an issue, because money is big tight at the moment, everyone's got financial pressure. The good thing about the mental health care plan is that you get subsidised visits to a therapist of your choice, a social worker, a psychologist, a counsellor, psychotherapist, all these different range of different therapists. You can access that through Medicare, which does alleviate the cost for a lot of people. Other people don't want to be part of that system. So then I have a discussion with them and say, okay, well, if you don't want to be part of that system, you either pay out of your pocket, which can cost quite a lot, or if you're actually after something that's more of a connection thing, as opposed to someone, telling someone you're deep and meaningfuls, here's a whole bunch of men's groups that I know of in our area that you can maybe go and check in with. So one's off the top of my head is Grab Life by the Bulls. They're doing amazing work in the community, free barbecues. You can go there and have a chat with someone over eggs and bacon roll. You've got Average Joes, which are all over the world, and others, they're from the Sunshine Coast as well, but they're all over the world. They meet up in cafes or pubs, and you don't have to drink either. You can go there and have a soda water for an hour a week and just meet up with other blokes and talk about bloke stuff. And they have themes as well. So I loved Average Joe's because they have theme nights. So you don't even have to think about what you're going to talk about. You just go there. Today's theme is aggression. How do we deal with aggression? And so you go, oh yeah, I can kind of tailor myself into that. And so showing the guys and talking to the guys or their partner about the options that are available empowers them with knowledge to then go, okay, they can go and do the work. And then eventually they might have that light bulb moment that's like, okay, now's the time. I'm going to give this a go. And I guess the added benefit of what we talked about before in my therapy business, I say, I take it out to the clinic. We'll go for a drive, or I'll come and meet you for coffee, or we'll go down the beach and do some grounding work on the beach, or, and a lot of it's just banter. I dress very casually to work. So it's t-shirt, shorts and a hat. So it doesn't even look like a therapist. It looks like just two blokes hanging out. And so once you show them, both either the male or their partner or support person, what the possibilities are, seeds start to grow. And once it gets big enough, then they go, yep, now's the time. And for me, it took 20 years, to get to that point. For other guys, I hope it's a lot less.
What would you say to any men out there, whether they're just listening to this podcast or whether their significant female has perhaps forwarded it to them to have a listen to, and they've grown up with that mentality of you're a pussy if you cry, you don't talk about your feelings, therapy's gay, like whatever the story is. What do you want to say to them, Simon?
I think it's recognizing that it's not weak to speak. That gets thrown around, but I think it's such a powerful message for guys. It's not weak to speak. I grew up being told all those things, from family members to, and I lived in a very alpha male household. I had 3 brothers. So it was very much testosterone driven. We're footy players, athletics, basketball, all the sports, we did it. So we grew up in that kind of mantra. And so many other guys did as well. And so just recognizing, A, it's not weak to speak, and we can be part of the change. We don't have to be this aggressive, stereotypical guy who takes it out on the world and drinks himself to death or takes drugs to death or whatever, or suicide. Men are overwhelmingly represented in the suicide data. 7 out of 9 deaths by suicide every day are male. Wow. And I think part of that is we don't know how to talk. We've enshrined it in our community that men shouldn't talk about these types of things. And that data extends into family and domestic violence data. This week on the Mindful Men podcast, I had Alan Ball from White Ribbon Australia talking about men ending violence against women and children. It's 95 or 97% of perpetrators say that victims, should I say that males are the perpetrators. And I look at these two data and it again reinforces that men struggle to talk about stuff and open up and show that vulnerability. So knowing that it's not weak to speak is the first step, so that we can then get the help that we need so that we don't blow up into volcanoes, and we can keep in our relationships, lower divorce rates, lower suicide rates, lower family and domestic violence rates, and be the blokes that we always wanted to be, not this shadow of a self that we've just come to be because we've lived life on autopilot and we think it's not going to get any better. We can be the change.
Gosh, I love that so much. And, from, as I was saying before, like that female, divine feminine perspective is, men, we need you. We need you in touch with your feelings. We need you opening up and getting in touch with your emotions, because we need you to hold us through that as well. And for the men that are out there listening to this, like, as women, we've got you as well. We don't we're done, with the alcohol and the party drugs and the alpha male and, the buff guys at the gym putting everyone else down. Like, ew, ick, you know? We're done with that. We're rising in our consciousness as humanity, and we're doing it from, this beautiful space. Men, we need you to step up. We need you to talk about your feelings, to come home to yourself as we're coming home to ourselves, so we can come home to ourselves together. And
Yeah.
that's the dance of the masculine and the feminine that we're seeing in humanity at the moment. And Simon, I'm just so loving this work that you do, and that you're holding space for men to come home to themselves, to let them know that, they are safe to have a voice, that it's not weak to speak, because for me personally, I would never want to engage, romantically, for example, with a man. Like, I would never, personally date a man that wasn't working on himself in some way, you know, and that might be just because of who I am, because I'm a coach, because I do the work on myself. But the depth of conversation that I get to have, and the type of questions that I ask when I'm, getting to know somebody, I, I want to go to that deeper level. I want to connect with them on that deeper level. If I'm looking at, having a mate for life, or, just even dancing through life with for a short period of time, I want to know that they feel safe enough to be themselves, that they can then hold space for me to be myself. And so,
Yeah.
for any
Yeah.
men listening to this, just have the fucking therapy. Like,
Well, it doesn't have to
it
be. It
makes
doesn't
us
even.
moist.
It also extends, though, beyond the romantic relations to your mates as well. So how many of us have gone to the pub, and that's the default place to go, and we just talked about superficial shit, like, oh, check out that Sheila at the bar, she's got massive tits, or did you see the footy score on the weekend, or what's going on at work? Oh, same old, same old. The guys that are working on themselves can take it to the next level and go, you know what, are you okay?
Mhm.
And they really actually want to know the answer, and then work with you to deal with whatever the issue is. So yes, in the family, absolutely, and also with the kids as well, showing that, connection with the kids, but also it extends to your broader networks as well, your mates. And no longer will you go to the pub and have the same conversation that you've been having for 20 years with your mates. You can actually take it different spaces, and I think that's the value of doing the work, is stop putting the band-aids on, actually deal with the shit that's going on, and grow in all aspects of your life, including the work as well. The better you are at work in your mind, the better you are at work, with your mates, with your lover, with your kids. Absolutely, everyone benefits.
Yeah, it's so true. I actually had a male client, coaching client, a few years ago, and he said to me, he said, I'm so ashamed that I'm in coaching because it means that there's something wrong. Now, fast forward a couple of years, we worked together for a little while. When I left that coaching firm, he continued on, I think with both male and female coaches. He's now a coach himself. Like, I'm just celebrating him, because it's like, oh my God, you get it. It's got nothing to do with something being wrong with you, and allowing yourself to be the fullest expression of who you want to be in this lifetime. And fuck, we need that more than ever right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And because when we look at the coach role, and growing up, you have teachers or you have parents, and they're guiding you. Or maybe if you're part of a sports club, you've got a sports coach. Or if you're into choir, you've got a singing coach. Or whatever you're doing as a young person, you have all these mentors that are guiding you. But then you hit 18, and unless you keep those things going, you're left, you become your own coach. And so this is where we get unstuck. We try to outthink stuff. We try to use alcohol, drugs to deal with it. But as you said, we're seeing a growth in coaches or people accessing therapy, or community groups. They're re-engaging, because we need really those types of mentors throughout all of our life. I've got a business coach. I've got a small business, so I'm trying to get their expertise to guide me to the next level of my business. Or I have a therapist. I'm a therapist in therapy. And so every now and then when I'm not going well, I put my hand up to my doctor and say, yep, get me a mental health care plan. I'm off to see the therapist again. There's no shame in that anymore. In fact, it just fine tunes me. And then in between, it's as long as we're doing the work in between, that's where the growth takes it to the next level as well.
Yeah, it's so important, isn't it? And I'm the same. Like I will ask people that I'm engaging as mentor and coaching, are you working on yourself? Tell me about that for you, because I can't show up and, be the best coach I can without having a mentor or a coach, whether it's in business, whether it's in life, whether it's in spirituality as well. I have mentors in that space, and so we all get to be vulnerable and just share, what it is that we're going through, because even as coaches, even as therapists, we're not fucking perfect. We don't have all the answers. And I know that definitely in the coaching industry, sometimes, people can be put on pedestals because it looks like they have it all together, or they're quite successful in business and then their Instagram's all perfect and it looks like they're just, thriving and making the millions and all that kind of stuff. But I'm telling you now, everyone's going through some shit on some level somewhere. We've all got our stuff.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite questions that my guys ask me, and I say my guys because I call them my guys, is they say, how are you going, Simon? And most traditional therapy clinic type setups, they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm going okay. We're here to talk about you. I'm like, I've had a shit week. And I'll tell them, and they're like, oh, tell me about that. And so it just helps guide the conversation. But I always leave it on, like, I'm not here to you're not my therapist. I'm the therapist in this situation, but we're going to learn together. And then I always take from what they're doing in their life and say, oh, thanks for showing me that again. Thanks for reminding me of that tool that we've been working on for the last, 3 months or whatever. That's picked me up today. And I always leave my sessions feeling on cloud 9, even if I'm having a shit day.
Yeah.
And I just love that connection, that shared lived experience goes such a long way in the coaching or therapy space. And maybe that's the thing that some people come unstuck with as well, is they're trying to find the right fit, but not feeling connected with the coach or the therapist that they're connected in with. But it's actually like hunting around and finding the person that clicks for you is really important.
It's so important, isn't it? Now, you mentioned you're on the Sunshine Coast. How do people find you, connect with you, work with you, and just be in your field?
Yeah, so I do therapy in Australia. So that's for, as an international podcast, I don't do therapy overseas yet. I am working out ways to do that. Maybe I'll get into coaching as well. I'm not sure. But in Australia, it's www.mindful-men.com.au. That's where you can access my therapy information. But that also links to my socials and the Mindful Men podcast. But for men across the world seeking broader connection, it's the Mindful Men Facebook community group. It's a free group. We can come in and connect with guys, and we talk about mindfulness. I show my ugly mug in there a few times a week, and hopefully break down some of these barriers that men face, isolation, loneliness, and improve their knowledge through mindfulness learning as well. So they're the two best places at the moment.
Amazing. We will link to all of that in the show notes as well. And before we wrap up, Simon, I've got one more question for you. To you, what is the meaning of life?
Wow. Big one. We should have opened with that. The meaning of life. I think for me, whenever those kind of questions come up, I think about my wife and kids and just being the best version of myself for them, because they are my world. And I admit that I struggle sometimes, and I yell at my kids or crack it at my wife or whatever. And my wife particularly knows when I'm having a rough day or an off day, because I'm just doing and saying things that I don't usually do. But as long as I can be my best version of myself for them, so that's continuing to do my work, continuing to share my story, because I find that therapeutic as well. That's the meaning of life, and hopefully it rubs off on them eventually and they come to my funeral.
Amazing. Simon, you have been such an incredible guest. Thank you so much for being on the Enlightened podcast.
Thanks so much, Jen. Really appreciate your time today, but also the work you're doing in this space and sharing conversations with people across the world. Love it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I hope you love the Enlightened podcast, and the biggest compliment you can give me is subscribing to this podcast, sharing it, and leaving a rating and review. Feel free to follow me on Instagram. My handle is @JenHamiltonOfficial, and the podcast handle is enlightened_podcast. You can also find the video version on YouTube on my channel. Just search Enlightened and don't forget to hit subscribe. Have a beautiful day and enjoy living the enlightened journey of life.